You deserved everything you got. This is a union city.
That is a Philadelphia tradition.
Seize the means of podcasting.
Oh, God, the boss has crushed us.
Let me tell you one thing else.
In oldie-timey times,
Who said it? Kanye West or Thomas
we
Paine?
will not raw dog reality for that one.
The pleasure of the flesh is in solidarity.
The Scab Buster.
It's going to be wholly unprofessional.
Keep together strong. Let that be your mantra.
We're here for a reason.
Theoretically.
To record another episode. What in God's name, Gabe, are we going to learn about today?
So, boats exist. Occasionally, they have things on them. And sometimes people take that and put it on docks. Those people who work on docks, for some reason, are called dock workers or longshoremen. But in 1913, a bunch of dock workers went on strike. And we're going to talk about that now.
I'm vaguely familiar with this, Gabe.
Yes. So our eagle-eared listeners who will remember that we've kind of touched on this a little bit with Dr. Peter Cole, who's the author of Wobblies on the Waterfront, Interracial Unionism in Progressive Era Philadelphia. And
Great book.
Oh, yes. And also the author of Ben Fletcher, The Life and Times of a Black Wobbly.
Yep.
Also a very good book. And so both of those interviews gave kind of a broad history of Ben Fletcher and Local 8.
Okay.
But we're going to do a deeper dive into the 1913 strike today.
Okay. All right.
So let's, as usual, we'll set the stage. We've already established that things are transported on boats, but Philadelphia was really, for like 75% of its history, has been a port city, and has
a major port city, really.
Yeah. I still maintain that up until the construction of the Erie Canal, it was the most important city in North America.
Damn.
At
Okay.
least economically. I will never forgive New York for stealing that from us with that goddamn canal. Philly's a port city. Back when we actually manufactured stuff in the city, it would get shipped out through our ports or through our port. And then stuff was also shipped in.
Okay.
And people are loading and unloading all of that was very, very hard work, especially before modern containerization and cranes.
Sure. Yeah.
Because today, when we think of like a big port, it's everything's coming in like pre-sized boxes and it's all getting stacked theoretically neatly.
Yeah.
But prior to containerization, which was started at the beginning of the 1900s, but really wasn't a thing until much later, everything basically had to get hauled off by hand, or you'd have to like go down into the hold of a ship, which would just be a big empty space full of crap.
And carry that shit up.
Yeah. So you'd either like bring a net down, or you'd have a crane drop down a net and you'd load a bunch of stuff onto the net and then it would get hauled out. Or you would like physically be carrying barrels and stuff out of the hold by hand.
That's tough work.
So early on, it was predominantly black workers, both free or enslaved.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And so that's because prior to the 1780s, Pennsylvania fully had slavery, and then they like slowly phased it out into the 1820s.
I love how you can slowly phase out slavery.
No,
we don't have to go down that road, Gabe. It's okay.
That'll be another episode, because the whole Quaker manumission thing was a whole...
Make it a Patreon episode so we can make the people give us money suffer.
Okay.
How do you dive bomb your own podcast?
Okay, so there's either enslaved workers or the actually sizable number of free black workers in the city as well. Okay. But even though Philly had a large free black population, there was obviously still a lot of racism, and black workers were often barred from any of the skilled trades in the city which left them to work on the docks because it was basically a job that no one wanted.
Sure.
Because it didn't have a lot of workplace protections and was very unsafe and really grueling and dangerous. That was the situation up until the 1840s.
Okay.
When Irish immigrants, for some reason, started coming over to North America, wholly unrelated.
Something about a Mr. Potato Head.
Yeah, something like that. So they started coming over in the 1840s, and basically they were like socially one step above the free black population in terms of like the racial hierarchy of Philadelphia. So basically they came over and immediately there was economic competition.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, of course.
eventually, in order for these Irish workers to get a job, they took it upon themselves to physically force their way onto the docks, either by attacking black workers.
I'm not okay with that.
No. Or attacking the shipping company or pier owners who hired black workers.
Okay.
Yeah, and so basically it was like a solid 5 to 10 years of very racist riots, so that the Irish immigrant population could force their way onto the docks, and
goddamn,
yeah, and then they became the like predominant dock worker community in Philly for the most of the rest of the 19th century.
Imagine beating slavery, getting a job, and then some puny little freckled redhead little monster who can't speak English correctly takes your job.
I'm glad you're here to say that as the Irishman.
We've done so many Jewish episodes, Gabe, where you can just let loose. I need to let loose a little bit, buddy.
It's true. Well, speaking of Jewish episodes, towards the end of the 19th century, once the Irish had like established themselves in Philly, another group of immigrants started coming over. It was mostly a mix of Eastern European Christians and Jews, as well as Italians and other Southern Europeans.
Okay.
And so they all kind of came into South Philly.
All right. Yeah.
And they're just like a mishmash conglomeration of ethnicities all jammed into South Philly row homes.
Like we have today.
Yeah. And then because Philly's employing class was still super racist, they couldn't find any skilled employment outside of, or they couldn't find any skilled employment, regardless of what their trades were back in Europe. So a lot of them ended up in either like manufacturer laboring trades or actually started getting hired on the docks. And the way you would get hired on the docks was through something called the shape-up system, which basically meant you would have to go and line up, or you'd go and either line up or like huddle up on the docks, like physically basically on what is now Delaware Ave, or Columbus Boulevard, and then the owners of the stevedoring companies or any of the shipping companies, basically the people hiring you to be a dock worker, would send their foremen or their managers out, and they would literally just like pick people from the crowd and say like, you have a job today, you have a job today, you have a job today, you have a job today. Except not actually today. You have a job for 4 hours. And then they would just pick randomly from the crowd. And then once you were brought in and hired, then they would split you up racially and ethnically.
Jesus.
So you'd have like a Polish work gang, an Irish work gang, a black work gang, a Jewish work gang, an Italian work gang. And this was done ostensibly because there were so many different languages that you needed people who could communicate with each other.
I mean, they have a point.
Yeah, but it was also very effective at keeping all of these racial groups in competition with each other.
Yeah.
And making it so that no one wanted to like start to organize a union, because if the Polish workers organized, then they would hire Italian workers or black workers or Irish workers. And there had been one attempt to form a union back in 1898 with the International Seamen's Union, or ISU. And that they had a strike, but it ended up getting defeated, and the union collapsed pretty much immediately afterwards. And there was also, and Philly was also unique at this, well, relatively unique at this point, in being an East Coast port city that didn't have unionized dock workers. It's just that all of the other unionized dock workers were with the International Longshoremen's Association.
Longshoremen's, yeah.
And that was an AFL-affiliated union that was super racist.
There's a trend.
The ILA had organized most of the other big ports, but they were generally either a whites-only union or they had segregated locals. And a lot of times they would do stuff where like you'd have the local, which was like in effect or in practice was whites only, and then you'd have an auxiliary local that black workers could join. And so that way the union could claim that they're not discriminating.
That's so stupid. That's so fucking stupid.
Yeah. And then the auxiliary locals like had limited voting rights and stuff like that. So in May of 1913, the dock workers in Philly had gotten fairly fed up with their situation. So they knew they didn't want to organize with the ILA because it should also be noted at this point, even though it was a very ethnically diverse workforce, it was majority black again. So, but what that meant was that in order for Philly to be, in order for a union to like have any hold in Philly, they couldn't be the super racist ILA because the black workers wouldn't have anything to do with that. So there was, however, another option. These really fun people called the Industrial Workers of the World.
Ooh. Hi, Wobblies.
And, starting around 1910, there had been the Wobblies had launched a little bit of a free speech fight in Philly, where they had speakers coming and like soapboxing to workers in Philly, trying to organize them. There had been some agitation in the textile industry, and they had actually established a local, or a general local, because the way the IWW operated was basically like, if you don't have a like specific workplace or a specific industry with enough workers to really form a strong union just in that industry, they'll create a generic union that anyone from any industry can join, and that'll serve as like the organizing base to go out to all of these other industries.
Yeah.
So they had one of those in Philly at this point, and they had been agitating in textile workers, I think steel workers as well, and then also the sugar refinery workers. So you had like Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was giving speeches in Philly throughout the early 19-teens, and there was just a large Wobbly presence, if not like a dedicated union. There were organizers active in the city. to the point where like the newspapers were regularly going and decrying all of these dangerous foreign agitators coming in and destroying their good, wholesome American workers. So, but in May 1913, Ed Lewis, an IWW organizer,
Damn, two
and
first names? What does this guy think he is?
he actually went and talked to the dock workers
Okay.
in early in May of 1913 and tried to organize them, but apparently wasn't able to find any takers.
All right.
So he'd come and like started those inroads and then didn't make much progress. It's also worth noting that Ed Lewis was white.
Yeah, that probably didn't help.
Yeah. Instead, during a strike of sugar refinery workers at Spreckles Refinery, the bosses fired basically all of the unionized workers, and the longshoremen who lived in the same neighborhoods as the refinery workers and were in contact with them probably saw and had some amount of sympathy with the refinery workers, seeing all of them get fired. And we're probably also talking to them about their IWW contacts and like why they were organizing, and basically like South Philly knew what was going on in South Philly.
Sure.
Same as today. And so even after Ed Lewis tried to talk to the longshoremen, afterwards, at the request of the longshoremen, the sugar workers asked their IWW contact, George Speed, to go talk to the longshoremen. But he helped the workers, or the dock workers, draft up grievances and gave them a brief introduction on how to organize a strike and how to form a union.
Nice.
It's also possible at this point that Benjamin Harrison Fletcher,
Friend of the show,
was involved. It's unclear whether or not he was involved in the organizing at this point, but I would say it's highly likely. And he was a black dock worker, active in the Socialist Party in Philly and active in the IWW at this point, and was already known as an organizer. On May 14th, 1913, after learning how to organize from George Speed, the 1,500 deep sea longshoremen walked off the job because they didn't really have tools because they were doing manual labor. So
I think you're saying like they swam off the job or something.
Yeah. No, they walked off the docks and went on strike.
All right.
And so there was also, even within like dock workers, which were some of the lowest rungs of workers in society at the time, deep sea longshoremen were the more skilled and highest paid of all of the longshoremen.
Okay.
Or all of the dock workers, because you had it was either differentiated between people working on coastal vessels that would just go from like Baltimore, Philly to New York and back, or people working on vessels that would go across the Atlantic. And so like transatlantic vessels, you're going to have larger cargoes, generally heavier cargoes, and generally more expensive stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
And just larger ships too. So it was a slightly more involved process. So deep sea workers went on strike, and their demands were actually pretty simple. They wanted a pay raise to 35 cents an hour, which is approximately $10 or $11 today. But they wanted that pay raise for all dock workers.
Oh,
not just deep sea dock workers.
Okay.
And so that's extremely important because it showed that they were willing to have solidarity with all of the other workers on the docks,
Yeah.
which took the first tool for the bosses away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that though.
Mm-hmm. And some of the stevedoring companies, the shipping companies, were already paying 35 cents because the International Mercantile Marine (IMM) agreed to pay 35 cents per hour earlier in May, but then some of the other companies had actually reduced the wages paid since the 1898 strike.
Okay.
When in 1898 they were making 30 cents an hour, and then companies slowly rolled that back to 25 cents an hour. So the workers were getting hit by both inflation and reduced wages.
Damn, that's why you don't give them an inch, man.
Yeah.
Never give them an inch.
Yeah, and so that's where the 35 cent demand came from.
Okay.
That they wanted everyone across the board up to 35 cents. And then they also undercut the ability to use like coastwise longshoremen as scabs because they were fighting for them too.
Yeah. I love when that solidarity comes through in people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They get that inkling that like, oh, shit, we should be me and you? All right, let's do it. Okay, man, let's go. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to watch.
And it's effective.
Yeah.
So then they also wanted a standard 10-hour day because at this point there were three hiring periods, and then you might get hired or not.
That's nuts. Three times in a day.
Mm-hmm. And then they wanted 10 or time and a half for night work, double time pay for holidays and Sundays.
Okay, I'll take it.
And then no discrimination against strikers. So they wanted everyone to be hired back after the strike.
Okay, all right.
And then final demand, recognition of a bargaining committee elected by the strikers.
So that's their own union, pretty much, right?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
They wanted union recognition.
All right.
But the way the Wobblies operated, especially in this time, was never signing a contract. So this was basically they wanted everyone to agree to what would effectively be a handshake deal, but with the understanding that if you break this, we're all out on strike like within 30 seconds. So
I mean, you kind of respect that.
Yeah. They also caught the bosses very much off guard. There were 17 deep sea vessels in port at this point.
Oh.
That included 8 passenger vessels.
God, imagine getting stuck in Philly in 1913, just on the docks. You don't know when you're going home.
Well, it wasn't like you could get off the boat, but your stuff would stay on it.
Oh, that's great.
So, like, if you were coming across with your like car in the hold so that you can have sex on the voyage coming across, or with some underclassman or underclass worker, that car is now stuck on the vessel, so you can't take it off. That was the first example of like wealthy cargo that I could think of.
I appreciate it, Gabe.
I'm glad.
Now I have to edit you in this episode. I never have to edit you, Gabe. You suck, man. You suck.
Oh, I'm sorry. But one of the ships, the Dominion, which was bound for Liverpool, did manage to leave on May 18th after being stuck in Philly for 4 days. Mostly because they ended up using the crew of the Dominion to do all of the loading and unloading.
Okay.
And that ended up being the path that they went for most of the ships, is they would just force the sailors to do all of the longshore work.
Okay.
Which also really sucks for the sailors, who were expecting to like probably have a little bit of shore leave for like 24 hours.
Yet again, that's in Philly.
Yeah.
We're, with respect to our Philly wives, Gabe. Philly tail is the best.
It's true.
Hey, it's just
Anyway,
not Jersey tail.
I mean, yeah, you could have ended up in Camden. Okay, so all of the major shipping companies started to get really worried and announced that they would divert all of their shipping to New York or Baltimore. The Wobblies responded to that by saying, "We'll send organizers to New York and Baltimore,"
I like it.
which they did. So at this point, I think Ben Fletcher and George Speed, if I remember correctly, were both dispatched to Baltimore. And they already had enough of a presence in New York that they could send organizers up there. But basically, they wanted to, even if they couldn't get all of those docks on strike, they wanted to go and make sure that they didn't scab on Philly.
Sure.
Also, the Wobblies had a very particular way of forming their grievance and bargaining committee and all of their electoral committees within, or not electoral committees, but all of their leadership committees within this union. So Bill Higgins, who was one of the Wobblies in Philly, reported that the strikers had elected a committee of 15 from among their own ranks. So this wasn't Wobbly organizers coming in and doing the negotiating. It was rank and filers. And they also made sure that committee of 15 had representatives from every racial and ethnic group.
All right.
From the dock workers.
Cool.
Because they also knew that if they had a committee of if it ended up just being all white guys, then grievances from Black or Eastern European workers were going to get dismissed.
Sure.
And the best way to do it was have basically solidarity top to bottom and across the board. And that really flew in the face of the AFL approach, which tended to have lily white bargaining units or bargaining committees. And was also just a clear fuck you to the shape up system.
Yeah.
And it was
yes, they were pissing off a lot of people.
Yeah, and if today it sounds like, oh yeah, that makes sense, we should do that. But in 1913, this was a
radical,
fairly groundbreaking and radical idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, even today, having representation within leadership is still a hot button topic.
Yeah.
The other fun thing that we keep learning with labor history is that we haven't solved any of these problems.
Go and do that revolution thing, guys.
Yeah.
Come on, please.
Pretty please. So now we're going to get to the less fun part.
Oh, Jesus.
The bosses were, of course, trying to break up the strike. Using a pretty wide variety of methods. The first one being scabs.
Tried and true.
Yep. So they hired detective agencies to spy on all of the strikers.
Mm-hmm.
Also had armed detectives, along with cops, patrolling the docks constantly.
Which side are you on, boys?
Well, that song didn't exist at the time. That was written in 1933, but I mean, sure. Yeah, whatever.
Damn, Gabe. I can't sing a song on the podcast? That's the only thing I do.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. That it was just as true in 1913 as it was in 1933, which I think is when that. I'm also
scabs.
wrong.
They changed a lot in 20 years, Gabe. Police and scabs, yeah.
Yeah.
They're a
they
lot
got
better.
very woke.
Yes. We're the wokest
so-
goddamn podcast you ever listened to, baby.
Mhm. So
I don't know what that means.
neither do I. Um, so using the time-honored tactic in Philly,
Okay.
the bosses brought in mostly black strikebreakers because they wanted to play up racial tensions.
Oh, Jesus.
Because usually the way it worked in Philly is once you bring in black strikebreakers, then the racist white workers will effectively start a race riot in order to keep black workers out of the job.
Fun!
Yeah. But with IWW Local 8, or with the dock workers, because they weren't Local 8 yet,
Damn spoiler alert, Gabe.
I'm sorry. I mean, read the books by Peter Cole.
Yeah, we expect everybody to read these books before you listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
Destroy that part in your frontal lobe that you remember this episode, okay? Pretty please. Pretty please.
But it doesn't appear to have worked.
Okay.
Probably because, the union was very racially diverse.
Yeah.
But there was a significant amount of violence between strikers and strikebreakers. But the violence never seemed to have had like a racial characteristic to it.
Okay.
And in all of the wobbly publications, when they were talking about strikebreakers, the race was never mentioned. It was always, the critique was only ever on scabbing.
Yeah.
It was never a racial attack.
Okay, good.
And then, so that was bringing in local scabs. Then also, like I had mentioned, pressing the sailors on these ships into service.
Yeah, right.
Then the other normal, super fun tactic that they loved was bringing in police to brutalize people.
Trider and Schroeder.
Yes.
Loving this.
Yeah.
This is when it gets fun. If you enjoy like police murdering strikers,
yeah,
out of the blue.
So
sugar snipers on the roofs.
Oh my god, I forgot about the sugar snipers. That was yeah. So
God, there's gonna be so many good like shirt logo ideas. I'm pulling so many quotes from this episode, Gabe.
So the cops started targeting the organizers.
As you do.
Yeah. Most specifically on May 16th, they targeted Jack McKelvey, who got arrested and very severely beaten by the cops. Right. He was never really charged with anything.
So?
Yeah.
Says the cops?
But they released him from his holding cell like a little over a day later. And he gave a speech to a meeting of 1,000 strikers, pretty much.
Damn.
In like normal wobbly fashion. He walked out of the jail cell and then immediately to the Union Hall.
The Wobblies have constructed a Union Hall outside the police station.
Yeah, so he then gave a speech to 1,000 strikers, imploring them to not get arrested. And
I mean, smart. That's a smart man.
Yeah. He said a jail cell was the most dangerous place for a working man in Philadelphia. Which, yes.
I like it.
Yeah, and so basically he was saying, like, we can win this through solidarity. Don't start, like, attacking the police because it's just going to end badly for you.
Mm-hmm.
Not that they don't deserve it, but purely from a practical standpoint.
This isn't the time and place.
Yeah, don't get arrested. And also, just on another side note with Jack McKelvey, he then sued the police officers that brutalized him.
How'd that go?
If I remember correctly, that case never got picked up anywhere.
What?
But the case, yeah, but the case against him did get picked up, despite there still not being any charges.
That's
He ended up
so fucking
getting
funny.
tried and convicted of something, and yeah, he was arrested and jailed for just being a wobbly. But
here we are talking about him.
yeah,
Over 100 years later.
yeah.
Us, Gabe, us. That poor man. That poor man's family. That'd be cool if their family was listening to us. Wouldn't that be pretty cool?
Yeah.
Hey, here's the history of your grandfather.
If anyone listening to this has the last name McKelvey, do some research on your family. And if you had a great grandpa or grandpa named Jack, who was like probably in his 20s or 30s around 1913, this is a possibility.
He was a badass fella.
Yeah. So by May 20th, the strike seems to have had its desired effects.
Okay.
Because the stevedore companies started offering 30 cents an hour for scab labor.
They were asking for 35, right? Yes.
Okay. But that meant that they had increased the amount that they were offering. So even though this wasn't an offer to the union, the prevailing wage had already raised.
Okay.
Then on the 21st of May, they did offer 30 cents to the union, but that got turned down, and basically all of the strikers agreed that they were willing to stick it out to get their entire list.
Okay.
And at that point, there were 25 vessels sitting in the river or tied up in port, waiting to get unloaded.
Damn.
It's also worth noting that when you have a vessel waiting to be unloaded, like even at this point, ports were, you never really have like an empty space in a port. So every second a vessel spends idle, it's just burning cash.
Yes.
So they always have to be loading or unloading stuff and shipping it. So having vessels just sitting in port for, at this point, 7 days is burning a pile of cash in all these guys' pockets. In all of the owners' pockets. And yeah, so they were having a pretty significant impact. And at this point on the 21st, they had also established a union hall at the new Academy Hall at 4th and South Street, which I think is 523 or 525 South 4th Street, which is now a wellness studio and an artist space, but the building is still there.
Okay.
So at this point, they claimed to have 3,000 men out on strike, and said that 1,000 of those had signed their red cards and were dues-paying wobblies.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also when they started making complaints to the police director and trying to sue the cops that attacked McKelvey. And all credit to the police director. He did say that he would look into it.
Oh, that's nice of him.
Yeah,
I didn't know they were looking into things at this time. I thought that was at least like 80s, you know.
Yeah, they did an internal investigation.
We found no wrongdoings.
Yeah,
from ourselves.
Yeah. By the 21st, the Wobblies had actually expanded their outside organizing campaign as well. Okay. So they were not only in Baltimore and New York, they were also in New Orleans, Newport News, Savannah, and even some foreign ports.
Really?
So they were basically, they had dispatched people everywhere saying, if you see cargo that has been diverted from Philly, don't touch it.
Damn.
Mm-hmm. So by the 26th, the bosses had started telling the press that they were optimistic and they figured they could break the strike. At the same time, the Wobblies were saying that they were adamant that they were still winning.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you gonna say? You're losing?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, guys. Come on. Let's be honest with each other.
The majority of the longshoremen were still out on strike, and they had support from all of the other port cities.
Good.
Then, unfortunately,
Fuck me.
yeah, things did start to break down on the 27th. Bosses said that reported to the Inquirer that they had enough scabs to manage all of the ships currently in port, and that the strikers were starting to return to work for the 30-cent per hour compromise. The strikers said that they hadn't lost ranks, but rather that the men that did return, or rather that the new workers that were coming in at 30 cents an hour weren't former strikers. They were just other people coming into scab.
Yeah, just getting a job.
Yeah. So it's
scabs, but yeah.
Probably a mix, but yeah. Then also at this point, the bosses declared that they would never recognize the IWW as a bargaining agent for the workers.
Come on.
But that also means that when they start saying that we won't agree to specific demands, that's actually movement, because they're willing to agree to some of the demands.
Okay.
So
Gabe.
Put that positive spin on it.
All right, I like that, buddy.
Admittedly, that was like the major demand for the whole strike, but still, a little bit of progress. Now,
thank you for that, Gabe.
Yeah,
you're the Lexapro of my life, buddy. Well, the Lexapro is actually the Lexapro in my life, but
yeah, I'm the Lexapro of this podcast. Sometimes I'm also the source of depression of this podcast. Then on the 28th, a gentleman by the name of Big Bill Haywood came to talk to the strikers, encouraging them to stick it out. There were claims at this point that there were claims that 60 men had deserted the strike. And wobbly organizers on the ground actually said, or admitted, that they lost 60 men. But they then also said that they had gained 100 other strikers from some of the coastwise longshoremen.
Okay.
So all in all, they were net 40.
Yeah.
So the strike was still going strong.
Are we still talking 3,000 total?
That was the claim. It's hard to tell.
All right.
It's also like, because employment was so informal, it's really hard to get a sense of what the actual numbers were.
Yeah, I just want to know, like, is it like it's dropping a bucket? Is 60 people dropping a bucket of like 3,000 going back to work, you know?
Yeah. Well, like, if you think about it, 60 people is probably like 4 or 5 work gangs.
Really? Oh, yeah, I guess so. Okay.
So the steamship companies at this point, or the stevedoring companies, actually seemed to kind of admit that the Wobblies were sort of right. And they came out with a new compromise offer of 30 cents per hour, time and a half after 6 p.m., and then double time for Sunday. So
how about those holidays, Gabe?
No.
Nope. Nah, damn.
Yeah. But it was still that's significant movement.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, still. But no recognition of the union?
No.
Gabe. Okay.
But that's also, especially at this point for the Wobblies, having official recognition even though it was one of their major demands, because they wanted to establish like a they always wanted to keep the threat of a strike, but if they could have negotiations, that did make things go smoother.
Yeah.
But because they never wanted a contract, not having recognition didn't necessarily mean you didn't have a union.
I get it. Okay.
So on a mass meeting on the evening of May 29th, the strikers voted to accept the compromise and ended
All right.
their strike in May. So the first strike was over.
Oh, no.
Mm-hmm. And they still wanted their union recognized. So even though it, like, basically the union still existed without recognition.
Yeah.
So then on July 19th, another strike was called.
What the hell is happening?
This one specifically for union recognition. And immediately the police, along with armed private detectives, were called back out to patrol the docks and intimidate strikers. Yep.
Okay.
They targeted piers 46, 48, 53, 55. And then the first day of the strike, there were only 3 deep sea cargo ships in port. One of them was the Dominion, the same one that got hit by the strike in May.
Yeah. That sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Those poor sailors. Those poor sailors, man.
So there was... Well, we're going to talk about the Dominion in a second. So there was a fair amount of violence on the first day of the strike.
Okay.
There were knife fights between strikers and strikebreakers.
Jesus Christ.
Uh-huh. Charles Stuckle.
Oh, okay.
It was 26 years old, of 740 Swanson Street, who was a striker, and Herbert Hayes, 34, of 415 South 21st Street, who was a strike breaker. They got in a pretty serious knife fight and were both hospitalized. And then it was just lots of like smaller street scuffles. That was just one of the ones that actually ended in hospitalization.
I was laughing at the fact that you had to put out their addresses. You're gonna get people swatted, Gabe. People still live at these houses. You know that,
right?
I know. We're doing the Labor John tour in July, buddies. Come on, let's go. Let's do it. All these were stopping at all these places.
I do really love how much the Inquirer would just dox people.
They don't do that anymore.
No.
Bring back the doxing, Inquirer.
Yeah. Now, talking about the Dominion, the sailors on the Dominion at this point actually showed some solidarity with the strikers.
Oh, really? Okay.
When they saw strikebreakers coming in to unload their cargo, they took it upon themselves to throw garbage and bottles at them while they were working. And this led to the police raiding the ship and arresting...
It's the only thing they know how to do.
Uh-huh. So at this point, you had a bunch of sailors from Liverpool getting arrested in a Philly jail and held on $500 bail for attacking strikebreakers. And I'm sure that I don't know this for certain, but I would not be surprised if there were some dealings where the captain of the ship went to the cops and was like, hey, release them all just onto my ship because I need all of this crew to get the ship out of here.
I mean, would you want to be in a jail cell with a bunch of Liverpool sailors?
Oh my God.
Who do not have shore leave anymore?
The combination of singing and fighting that must
Right.
have gone on in that jail cell.
At the very least.
Yes. So it was estimated that between 500 and 600 men were on strike from the International Mercantile Marine Company.
Okay. Awesome name again.
Mhm. And undisclosed amounts from the Port Richmond coal wharves and the Charles M. Taylor and Sons shipping company.
Damn.
But this is actually an expansion of the original strike area, because initially they were just targeting the South Philly docks,
Mm-hmm.
and now they were getting up into Port Richmond and like the whole
Yeah.
length of breadth of the Delaware docks. And the so the bosses also started giving in a lot more quickly, and they actually started getting recognition from a lot of individual companies. The all workers except for those at the International Mercantile Marine and the American Line piers returned to work, basically within like a day or two of the strike starting.
Oh, wow.
But at those two piers, they kept the picket line going.
Yeah.
And at that point, the story seems to have run dry. Like, I can't find any other information about what happened after that.
That's a letdown.
Yeah. My assumption is that they probably called off the strike because they recognized that it would just end up eating up resources.
Yeah.
And they had enough of a union ready at that point that they had, whenever they had any grievances, they could just go on strike to force them.
Sure.
So this is also when they officially formed Marine Transport Workers Industrial Union Local Number 8.
Hey! Otherwise known as Local Number 8. Hey!
Yeah, or just Local 8.
Yeah, Local 8.
The MTWIU was the Marine Shipping and Longshoring branch of the IWW that focused specifically on that industry. Because while the Wobblies were obviously an industrial union, there were, when they had enough of like a specific industry organized, they would establish like smaller subsidiaries specifically for that industry, because there's specific things about longshoring that like a steel worker isn't going to understand.
Sure.
And vice versa. So it helps to have like some level of expertise there. And it just helps with organization. And so they continued on in their life for the next decade or so. And the next time I know they went on strike was May 14th, 1914, because they established a very fun tradition of having a birthday strike. So,
which is the cutest thing.
Mm-hmm. So they declared that May 14th would be a worker holiday where they would go and celebrate the creation of their union and basically just go have a picnic. And they weren't set up picket lines or anything. It was just all of the dock workers would not show up for work on May 14th.
That's fucking awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's the most wholesome thing I've ever heard in my entire life, Gabe.
And it serves two very important purposes, where it not only like brings everyone together and also in a racially integrated setting, which in Philadelphia in 1914, that's a whole huge deal. But then also is still like a power flex on the bosses. that you get.
Yeah.
When
Hey, fuck it. I'm off. I'm
Yeah.
done. It's my birthday. It's our birthday.
But that's the end of my story.
Okay.
So,
but the beginning of the Dominion story.
mhm.
Ding, ding, ding.